Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Andrew Olson, and you are watching a classic cinema review. Dracula, directed by Todd Browning and released by Universal Pictures in 1931. A bumpy carriage ride takes Renfield to a small village in Transylvania. He is warned by the innkeeper not to continue to Castle Dracula at night, but to wait at the inn until daylight to continue. Renfield, however, pays no mind to the superstitious townfolk and their folklore of vampires and wolves that roam the night, and continues his journey to Borgo Pass. He meets a second carriage that will take him to the castle. During the nerve-wracking trip, the driver and his luggage seemingly disappear into thin air, while the horses are guided by a large bat. At the castle, Renfield meets the charming yet eccentric Count Dracula. The two go over the details of Dracula's new lease on Carfax Abbey in England and also discuss travel arrangements. After Dracula bids Renfield goodnight, he returns a short time later and Renfield falls victim to the vampire. The following evening, Renfield, Dracula, and Dracula's luggage sail aboard the schooner Vesta. Several days later, the schooner drifts into Whitby Harbor with a crew of corpses aboard and Renfield, a madman, in the hold. Renfield is given residence in Dr. Seward's sanitarium for wanting flies and spiders to eat and sustain himself with. Meanwhile, Count Dracula makes his rounds of London and also makes the acquaintance of his new neighbor, Dr. Seward, his daughter Minna, Minna's friend Lucy Weston, and Minna's fiancé Jonathan Harker at the opera. Lucy is also quite taken by the charming Count. Meanwhile, all over London, young women keep turning up either dead or dying with 2 marks in their neck and a severe loss of blood being the only clue as to what has happened to them. Lucy ends up being one of the victims after a while. Professor Van Helsing meets with Dr. Seward and colleagues and announces after some research that there is a vampire in the midst of society. Renfield is the main subject of concern as he escapes his room quite often and desires the blood of small things such as bugs or rats to sustain himself with. When questioned, Renfield desires to be sent far, far away from the sanitarium so as nothing will happen or affect Miss Minna. It isn't long before Minna reports having nightmares, very bad dreams of a face coming out of the mist when she's sleeping, and a severe lack of strength as well. She also has 2 marks on her neck. Van Helsing finally meets Count Dracula in person and starts putting the pieces together with doubt from Jonathan or Dr. Seward to back him up. With Minna under the vampire's spell, the race to save her from a fate worse than death is running very short. But I won't say who survives in the end. Dracula is a horror / science fiction / monster movie which is based on the Hamilton Dean and John L. Balderston play that was on Broadway, which in turn was based on Bram Stoker's original novel. The film is also the first in the Universal Horror Monsters collection or series, if you will, which included Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, and so on and so forth. Let's run down the cast real quick. Bela Lugosi plays Count Dracula, Helen Chandler as Minna, David Manners as Jonathan Harker, Dwight Frye plays Renfield, Frances Dade as Lucy Weston, Edward Van Sloan plays Van Helsing, Herbert Bunston as Dr. Seward, Joan Standing as, I think she's credited as playing the maid, but she actually plays Nurse Briggs. And of course, Charles Gerard as Martin, who is Renfield's attendant at the sanitarium. The portrayal of the characters is one of the most noteworthy pieces of this film. Bela Lugosi as Dracula is his portrayal of the character is one which all others are compared to. A lot of other people who have played Dracula play completely the opposite or completely differently to the way Lugosi played it. And rightfully so, because it's such an original performance, you don't really want to parody the character if you're playing it straight. Which also brings me to how many times he played the character. Now, of course, he played the character on Broadway, so that's one, but I'm not going to include his portrayal off screen. So on screen, how many times did Bela Lugosi play Dracula? I'll give you the answer at the end of the video. If you know, or you think you know, put your answer down in the comments below, but no cheating. Don't get that cell phone out. I don't want to hear any swiping of that screen. Take a guess if you don't know. Bela Lugosi, as well as Edward Van Sloan, who played Van Helsing, are the only two actors who are reprising their roles from the play on Broadway. Everybody else was new to their parts in the movie. Van Helsing, the way Edward Van Sloan plays him, gives the perfect battle of wills against Dracula. It's a shame that they weren't in more scenes together because their characters as well as their performances are perfect in terms of match good versus evil. Dwight Frye, he gives a very memorable performance as Renfield. His performance is probably the most versatile in the movie. He starts out as the upper crust, staunch Englishman, and then ends up being the madman and everything in between throughout the film. When he becomes the sanitarium lunatic, if you will, for lack of a better term, his portrayal of Renfield is probably the closest to the character that's in Bram Stoker's novel compared to all of the other portrayals in the film. Jonathan Harker is a very different character. The character is almost the opposite, where he tries very much to help Dr. Seward and Van Helsing in the book, whereas in the movie he's almost unwilling to believe what's right before his eyes. But David Manners does play the character well enough on screen, so I can't complain about that. Everybody else does their characters well. Everybody was chosen, obviously, for the particular vision that the filmmakers had, and I'd say they did a good job. I want to point out real quick that Charles Gerard as Martin adds a little bit of levity to the horror of the film, the drama of the movie. Anytime there's a long drama or a horror picture, if you get a little bit of levity to break it up, it makes it a little bit easier on the audience to go and sit through the whole thing. The cinematography, director Todd Browning was a notable silent film director. He directed Lon Chaney Sr. in a number of successful horror films. That's why he was picked to direct this one. He brought the silent film era into the talkies with this movie because there are a number of scenes that are rather silent. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because there is a mood that was created in these long sequences of quiet that work well with the atmosphere and just creates this mood that is undeniable. Having said that, there are a number of tracking shots that add some more dynamic camera work to the film that were done by Karl Freund. He was a German cinematographer, I believe, and he gave the camera movement and, in essence, brought the film away from silent movies, as it were. So you kind of had one foot in the silent era and one foot in the modern talkies. It was sort of a, I won't say it was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde sort of a dynamic, but it works. It works. There's nothing particularly, nothing that really stands out that I can really say that was great in this scene or this was horrible in that scene. It all works on a simple, straightforward level. The rest of the elements of the film that I'm going to talk about, unfortunately, were hampered by budgetary constraints. The music, for instance, consists of a number of sections of pieces by Tchaikovsky and Wagner. A piece of, I believe it's Swan Lake, plays over the opening credits, for instance. I think the film would have benefited from an original score written for the film. In 1998, there was an original score written for the film by Philip Glass. It fit the film. It was very sort of Victorian era-esque, and it did add another element on top of everything else. The film did not change except for the music, but there were those scenes where it's quiet, and the music, because it was all of a sudden layered over something that was quiet intentionally, almost takes away from those scenes. But both versions of the film are equally enjoyable for their own musical differences. So I recommend checking both of them out if you feel the need to do so. The special effects also suffered because of the budgetary constraints. There wasn't a lot, and it might also have been because of the filmmakers. You never see the bat transform into Dracula or vice versa. The bat usually shows up and the camera moves to focus on the victim, and then we'll move back and Bela Lugosi walks into the frame. That's not a bad way to portray the character, but in a horror science fiction film like this, you almost expect a little bit more. He also is never shown exiting his coffin. He is shown lying in the coffin at least once, but again, the camera diverts and then goes back to him when he has gotten out, but that's not actually shown, which was a bit disappointing as well. The set pieces are noteworthy, but I wouldn't classify those as special effects. The biggest downfall, however, to the movie is the story. It's not that the story is bad, it's just that the movie, because of budgetary constraints, was based more on the play than on Bram Stoker's original novel. Originally, it was intended to be based on his novel, but they just didn't have the budget to do so. The movie is only 115 minutes long. And the book was full of detail. The book was much more drawn out. There was elements of mystery to the book, and finding out who Dracula is and having the characters go through this mysterious, almost nightmarish story. We find out too much too soon in the movie, despite the fact that the movie is actually rather a slow, plodding sort of a film. There needed to be more detail, is what I'm getting to. The book had so much more detail. It was basically a collection of letters, diary entries, and journals that were collected. That's how everything is portrayed, and it adds a whole nother dynamic, because everything that you're reading has already happened, despite the fact that while you're reading, you're rooting for things not to happen, when in fact they've already come to pass. And that just adds another element to everything that the movie unfortunately lacks. Having said all that, though, the movie isn't all bad. This, as I stated, has some great performances. It's got some noteworthy actors, A-listers, and this is the first. It's not the first horror movie, but this is where all of the stereotypical horror elements, the huge spider webs, the gothic nature of the backgrounds, and the atmosphere, it all kind of stems from this film, which is very interesting. So those reasons make this film worth watching, regardless of the shortcomings that it has. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5-star rating, and there are two versions. Actually, there are three. There's a Spanish version, which was filmed on the same sets. I haven't seen that one, though, so I'm not going to go into it. But still, the Philip Glass version with the different music and the original. I would start with the original just because that's where it all began. I'm going to round this out by thanking Jerry at drmacro.com. He has a plethora of images for this film, which you have been viewing as I've been talking. Please check out his website for images on this film as well as many others. I'll leave a link in the description below. I want to thank all of you for watching. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Comment down below. Let me know what your favorite version of Dracula was. Did you like the book? Which movie or television variation did you enjoy, if any at all? And subscribe, of course, for more videos coming up relatively soon. I've got a few more of these planned, so stick around. And of course, I can't finish without telling you how many times Bela Lugosi portrayed Dracula on screen. Twice. He played a vampire in a number of movies. Some were very Dracula-esque, but they weren't actually called Dracula, so I can't say that they were Dracula. He played Dracula once in this film, in 1931, and he reprised his role for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948. And that's it. If you want to count his portrayal of the character on Broadway, I suppose that's 3 times, but twice only in cinema. I want to thank you all for watching, and I look forward to seeing all of you next time.